World Regions in the Global Context, East Asia, Part 1. We're going to start with learning outcomes. We're going to explain how humans have adapted and modified the landscapes of East Asia. We're going to describe how land and water management in East Asia may be impacted by climate change. We're going to list the main physical subregions in East Asia and describe their tectonic origins and related hazards, and identify the adverse ecological effects of urbanization and industrialization and the modernization of agriculture. We're going to distinguish the centers of power in East Asia in the pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial periods. We're going to compare the development of differing economic experiments in the 20th and 21st century in China, South Korea, and Japan. And we're going to identify the geopolitical tensions within East Asia. We'll trace the linkages of East Asian cultures within and beyond the region using specific examples, and describe the forces that have caused significant declines in population growth in East Asia. So we're going to start with East Asia occupies the area on the edge of Asia. So if you head straight from here, you're going to hit the United States. And includes the countries of China in the purple, Japan in the kind of orange or salmon, and North Korea in the yellow right there, and South Korea the light green, and Mongolia the blue here. And the region contains some of the largest and most dynamic economies globally. So you have some real powerhouses, three of them right there. North Korea is the exception. Mongolia also, much smaller economy, but even Mongolia's economy is probably better than North Korea's. The region also contains some of the worst economies, primarily North Korea. The region also faces some of the worst issues, including wealth disparities, environmental issues, and volatile political situations. The Korean continent is extremely vulnerable. It's one of the two or three most volatile areas anywhere on the planet. The Middle East, Africa also have a lot of instability, but after the Middle East, you probably have the Korean subcontinent. And particularly North Korea is very provocative. It will probably come to a head in the next 5 to 10 years. For wealth distribution disparities, the two Koreas, huge disparity, when they both equally have basically half of the peninsula there, and but the wealth is definitely in the south. In 1950, it was kind of evenly divided. It was fairly balanced, but since 1950, the South has developed following a capitalist Western model, and the North has remained a communist country and has not developed its economy and virtually has no exports, has very little that it sends anywhere except maybe to China. Not really much of anything going on. Mongolia is starting to emerge. It's been, kind of surrounded by Russia up here in the north. That's Siberia up there, and China here. So it's kind of a landlocked and has remained largely undeveloped area, and is starting to develop a little bit. In China is kind of a region of two differing situations. China, on the one hand, has a very dynamic economy, one of the largest economies, I guess number 2 on the globe now. It has been one of the fastest growing economies anywhere on the planet for the last 10 or 15 years. A lot of that growth has been based on government-owned companies doing development, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But the one thing about China is about 600 million of the billion people in China live on less than $2 a day. So you have this region through here, very wealthy, a lot of middle class, wealthy, large populations, but this region in here and up in here, almost no wealth. And people live, particularly as you get into the interior, there's huge disparities in income, and we'll show that a little bit later. And then you have the environmental issues, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but China has severe environmental issues. I think politically, China is a volatile situation. It appears on the surface to be very stable, but I think as time tells, 8 to 10, 15 years, you could see dramatic changes in China, and we'll get into some of the reasons for that a little bit later. The region is also highly susceptible to climate change. You look at it, this area in here is mainly lowland, and if you have any sort of climate change and rising sea levels, even moderate rising sea levels of 4 to 10 feet, most of this area along the coast here, this central area here, and a lot of this region down in here is going to be submerged. And the question is, what are you going to do with 100 million people when there's no land for them to be on? It's going to dramatically change it. The other issue that comes in there with climate change is you see these rivers, they flow out of the Himalayas here. This is the Himalaya mountains run along through here. And these are glacier-fed rivers. So it's a glacial ice melt that is creating the water that flows out of these rivers. It flows this way into the subcontinent, into India, Bangladesh, and all the way down through Indochina, and it also flows here into China. Well, if you have glacial ice melt and those glaciers disappear and they're receding rapidly, there may be a time in the next 20 years where this region here is without water for 2 to 3 months out of the year. Now, we get into tectonically active area. East Asia is extremely tectonic. If you look here, you have the Australian plate, which is this big piece right here. It is moving north. You have the Eurasian plate, which is all of this big piece right here. It is moving, and that includes this area down here, it is moving west, or actually east. It is moving east. You have the Philippine plate moving north. This right here, you may have heard the term Ring of Fire, Pacific Ring of Fire. That's this region through here. It has a lot of volcanoes, particularly in this region, all down through here, but it's also tectonically very volatile. So is this region through here. Right here, where the Indian plate is crashing into the Eurasian plate, this piece right here, and this crashing in here, that's what has created the Himalayan mountains. They're still growing. This plate here is being subducted. This region through here is also volatile, and you have the addition of the Three Gorges Dam on here, which is going to, some scientists believe, will put additional stresses on tectonic plates in China, and could have very, very significant tectonic activity there as a result of that additional weight created by the water on top of that on the ground. As you see here, the code for where these things are, Southeast Asia and Indonesia relatively stable, but everywhere around it is very active. Lots of volcanoes, lots of tectonic movement, earthquakes, resulting tsunamis, lots of issues. East Asia contains a variety of climate zones. So you tropical in the southeast, this region down in here, arid, semi-arid in the west and central, this region's up here, semi-arid, arid, Arctic tundra, right here, this is alpine tundra, this gray, continental and continental polar, that's these shades of purple. That's very cold, typically dry and cold. And then you have marine tropical down here and in some of this region down in here. So you have a lot of variety of types of climate. And you know, there's a thing we're going to learn about. It's called orographic effect. Now the orographic effect means that moisture moving here out of the Indian Ocean, moving north into here, hits these Himalayas and deposits itself on this southern edge, which means this region in here basically doesn't get any moisture. You also have mountain ranges along here which block out moisture coming this direction, and then you have up here, this is Siberia, you have this continental polar, so you have this air masses, cold, dry air masses that come across here and make this region not only dry but very cold. So you have dry, cold in here, hot, warm, and humid in here, and cold and humid in here. You kind of see here, this is in Mongolia, and this is in Southeast Asia. Completely different. You can see the humidity in the air there, and you can see that it's really dry here. Not a lot of trees, not high grass, some grass, but not high grass. You can see there's a little bit of runoff from the mountains, but it's not really big. So it's typically dry. It's typically cold, lots of wind. It's kind of a typical region. Asia has three dominant land structures. You have the Tibetan Plateau, that's this area right here. Major rivers flow from glaciers, so they're flowing this direction, coming down, and are susceptible to global warming. Continental margin, which is this area, the majority of the population lives here. It's extremely vulnerable to global warming and rising sea levels. And then you have the central mountain and plateaus. These are non-ethnic Chinese, large Muslim population, a lot of political unrest. I mean, one of the things that is, as Westerners, sometimes we don't always recognize, is that not all the people in China are Chinese. There's a lot of different ethnicities, and there's a lot of different religions, and there's a lot of ethnic strife. We tend to look at them and say, oh, they're all Chinese, but they're not. People in this region are very different than people over here or over here. People in this region are different than all of them. People in this region are different. As you get in this range, they're a lot different. Up in this range, much different than this area down here. So you have significantly different cultural and ethnic groups throughout the country, and that is creating a lot of issues for China long term.